Did you know that black snakes don't always start out black as juveniles? Now, these are rat snakes, one of the species in the US that is most commonly seen around farms and homes, and they're usually called black snakes. Now, we have many different kinds of black snakes in the US, so I don't really like this term, but when they're adults, they are typically black. Some of them have more pattern, but usually they darken a lot as adults. Now, this girl is 5 years old, and she's pretty much an adult at this point. She might grow a little bit more, she might darken a little bit more, but this is what the average adult rat snake looks like, especially in the northern and western parts of their range. This is a juvenile. He is less than a year old, and as you can see, looks drastically different. Rat snakes go through something called ontogenetic change, which is something a lot of different animals go through. But some snakes go through really dramatic ontogenetic change, meaning, as babies, they look very different from adults. So as you can see, he has a light background with dark hexagonal blotches, which are irregular. They're not all hexagons, but generally that is the case. He has a checkered belly that darkens a little towards the tail, but it's mostly evenly checkered. As he ages, most of his belly will be blackish, and the upper part closer to his neck will be checkered. Now, the average person doesn't know that rat snakes, which they call black snakes, look like this as juveniles. Most people assume that they look like this their entire lives. The problem with that is a lot of people, when they see these guys, they don't know what they are. So they assume that they might be something venomous, and usually people assume that they're copperheads. Now, I don't think they look anything like copperheads, but to the average person who may have never seen photos of a juvenile rat snake with the words juvenile rat snake, they might not know. So often people think this is a copperhead. And that's okay. I mean, if you misidentify snakes, it's usually not a big deal. The problem is when you try to hurt that snake or you try to pick it up thinking it's something venomous, or picking up a venomous snake thinking something is harmless. The best thing you can do is, if you're not sure what a snake is and you haven't studied all your native species, is to just leave them alone. If you have to move it, you can use a broom and a garbage bin and just keep your fingers far away from it at all times. Better yet, get an identification first, like on Facebook. On Facebook, there's a group called Live Snake Identification and Discussion, and you can post there and experts will tell you what the snake is. Just make sure to include your location. Now, rat snakes are pretty easy to identify. Often, adults will be like this, with almost no pattern, but sometimes subadults and adults will have some remaining pattern. Even if they're mostly black, you'll still be able to see some of these saddles. So, look for those kind of hexagonal saddles. They're not rounded, they're not ovals, they're not squares. And look for a long, slender snake with a pretty long, slender tail. Not as long as racers, but it's still pretty, it's not a short tail. And on the head, you'll see almost no head stamp, it's just gray. Some western rat snakes will have some markings on their heads, but generally they don't. And on the side of their head, as juveniles and sometimes as adults, they have an eye stripe that goes through their eye and over the top of their nose. Now, adults pretty much lose that because they darken so much that you can't see the eye stripe anymore. But some of them, like the ones in Alabama and Georgia, and some of Florida, especially the Panhandle, they're called white oak rat snakes, or white oak snakes, because their color resembles a white oak bark on a white oak tree. And they look a lot like this as adults, because they don't darken. They hold that light color, it helps them with camouflage with the different kinds of trees in that area. And also, they don't have to absorb as much heat in the southern parts of their range. In the northern parts of their range, most snakes are darker, just in general, especially rat snakes. These guys are from Virginia, and most of Virginia rat snakes darken considerably as adults. Often they'll still have some pattern, unlike racers, but they're usually pretty dark, so people call them black snakes. And as you can see, her belly, closer to her tail, is completely black at this point, and that's pretty common. You can see there's a gradient, and it kind of turns from checkered to mottled. You can also note the vertical lines on their lips. You can see it with a juvenile and with adult. These are called labial bars, and generally they're not seen in venomous snakes in the US. You can't identify with just one feature, but you can use it to help identify. Racers don't have these. Now, if you want to learn more about rat snake range and rat snake taxonomy, which is a little confusing at the moment, I left a great article link in the description for you guys to check out. If you want to learn more about snakes, there's a great Facebook group that's been around for years called Wild Snake Education and Discussion. If you want to learn about identification, there's a Facebook group called Learn to ID Snakes. And if you need a snake removed from your house or just shooed away from your yard, and if you're not comfortable with doing that, there's a Facebook group called Free Snake Relocation Directory. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to message me on Snake Fact Saturday or comment below this video.